Imagine it's your birthday as the prince of a mighty kingdom. Several nobles have come to the royal palace to celebrate. Not you, but your expulsion to a faraway barren land. On this auspicious occasion of your 15th birthday, by your father, the emperor of the kingdom of Centuries. As the 17th prince, you have been granted a dominion and have no choice but to comply. Comply is what our protagonist Heel does when he is cast away by his father straight into the ocean. His dominion was soon in his sight, comprised of nothing more than a few rocks that barely make it a reef. He is terribly disheartened at the sight of the Sheol Reef, an area that not even pirates dared to enter. He had puked his guts out for 15 days on a ship, which brought him to the line of no return, after which his escorts leave him in a small boat, immediately turn around, without checking if he can even make it to the reef. So much for a prince. His siblings felt no pity for him either, the reason being Heel's poor abilities that made him a disappointment for the royal family. Unlike him, his brothers were born with exceptionally strong crests on the back of their hands, like that of a sword god, and king of magic, alongside powers living up to their names. Heel, on the other hand, was a bit of an exception. Much less powerful, his crest was unknown and unheard of. Despite the strenuous efforts he made to make up for it, since a very young age, nothing really worked out in his favor. With final hopes of familial mercy, he had pleaded his father to give him somewhere he could at least survive at. But the king of Sanfeliz deemed his mission as a word of God. Basically, he has been exiled to an uninhabitable bunch of rocks, and with the little luggage he has, he wonders if getting executed for treason would have been better, but never say never. As he rows closer, he finds no shore for him to land on, but he does find himself a creek within the crags. The fierce waves would soon smash him into the rocks ahead, necessitating his need to slow down using wind magic. But he couldn't even produce as much as a gentle breeze. He somehow manages to land and haul his stuff out, and after tracing a forlorn cave ahead, he first decides to safely store what little he has. But as soon as he takes a look inside, his blood runs cold. Myriad skeletons of humans and monsters alike lay within, slowly being eaten away by age. Heel is horrified and scared, for they might just be exiled individuals like him. And if none of them survived, his chances aren't any good either. Desperate to survive, he brings his luggage inside. Before seating himself atop a chest, he looks into the expanding ocean ahead, with a hopeless look in his eyes. It was horrifying and beautiful at the same time. Unlike the chaos he had been living in, that was only horrifying. Slapping himself, he resolves himself to survive no matter what. If he decides to escape the place, his only choices would be either a pirate ship or a ship from a foreign country. So conclusively, he is just one ship away from being shipped off as a slave. At best, his supplies will last him a month, while his magically incompetent self will have to harvest the rainwater and fish for food. To stay here, he'll have to first clean the area and bury the bones. And to do that, he opens his toolbox. From within, he first finds himself a pickaxe. And as soon as he holds it, a foreign voice resounds, "Acquired mining tool." He frantically looks around as he wondered where the sound came from, and straight into his head at that. He pleads the mysterious one to speak again, and speak it did. "Acquired mining tool? Do you want to mine?" Flabbergasted when he asks who it was, it replies that it's the advisor function of his crest, the Cave King. The crest had been dormant since his birth, and reasonably so, because he was far from any caves that might exist in a palace. Besides the advisor function, not only did the crest boost his mining skills and support him altogether, it even allows him to increase his rank when inside a cave by doing cave things. While overwhelmed by the torrent of information, Heel realizes that mining was his calling in life. As soon as he decides to try it out, the advisor initiates an optimization, because of which massive sections of the dirt before him starts to glow. Thanks to its crest, these glowing spots indicate the most suitable areas for mining, for not only are they brittle, but will also prevent the cave from collapsing. In a vague attempt to test it gently, he ends up scoring a huge section of the soil because of the optimization. While of the support functions mentioned previously, night vision helps him see properly in the darkness. He resolves himself to first create a room to sleep in and continue to mine with a newfound goal. As he continues to dig around the area, Heel's exhaustion turns into excitement. and the small room he had planned for initially into a vast cavern. Simultaneously, the amount he digs with each blow increases as the rank of his mining skills improve with time. As he advances into the aftermath, the advisor inquires if he wants to retrieve the 168 stones he has dug so far. As he wonders about how and where the rocks would go to, Mr. Advisor reveals that his crest can store whatever and however much he mines. Within a few more minutes of mining, the surrounding rubble made it difficult for him to move around, hence compelling him to retrieve the stones that popped into his inventory like an otherworldly Minecraft. When asked if he wants to automate the retrieval of the stones, he consents immediately. Considering his pace of mining, he is anxious that he might have already dug through the length of the reefs, when Mr. Advisor relays to the Cedric Diggory that he is actually 10 meters below from where he had started. Heel isn't too sure what a meter is, hinting to us that he might be just another Minecraft-loving and metric system-hating American after all. Before long, he breaks a sweat and stops for a breather, only to find that his inventory was brimming with all kinds of ores. He is amazed to find even gold amongst the digits of iron, copper, and bronze. But it's of no use to him now, is it? The most intriguing of them all were the 15 magic stones he has, which upon use will increase his magic power in proportion with the size of the stone used. While he is grateful for having found himself a solution after all these years, his curiosity gets the better of him. The next interesting ones were known as turtle stones, using which he can increase his lifespan by a day for each stone. It was all thanks to his mysterious crest that he has made these amazing discoveries. And he also sees the infamous Sheol Reef in a new light. This was his power. This was his domain. With a newfound energy, he started to dig deeper into the cave and just forgot everything about escaping this place. As he reached a depth of 30 meters, his inventory was overflowing with all kinds of stones, varying from gems to them turtles. Giving in to his growing curiosity, he considers how great it would be if he could use some advanced magic. And in lieu of that hope, he decides to use all the 90 magic stones he has on himself. Contrary to how grand it made it sound, nothing grandiose happened to him when he used them. Neither did he feel any different, nor did he turn into a Super Saiyan. Embarrassed, Heel timidly confirms with Mr. Advisor that he has indeed used them all. And to put it to the test, he decides to try cleaning the piles of dirt he has dug on his way in. He tries conjuring the wind magic by extending his palm. But the moment he did that, blasphemously huge torrent of winds respond to his call. The storm-like prowess cherishes all the rubble, bones, and dirt on its way out, which spews out of the cave like a blowing kettle. The one responsible shivers in fright of what he has just done, his hand trembling in the pain the magic caused. While apologetic to the owners of the bones, Heel cannot believe that just 90 magic stones could empower him so monstrously that he could use such great magic. Sensing something behind himself, he turns around only to be pummeled by something that jumps at his face. And while on the ground, a jello-like creature wobbled on his chest. Soon, it had been 3 days since he was banished to the Sheol Reef. Before departing for his day of work, Heel checks for his tools, food, and most importantly, a new friend named Shell. Whatever creature it was, Shell was his very first companion in this lonely place. It kept bouncing around him back when he had first discovered it, only to realize that the creature was a slime. Mr. Advisor offers him a chance to tame the little thing, but Heel knows nothing about taming. He had indeed read about it previously, but his kingdom that despised monsters allowed none to be seen alive. So even if the skill only worked on non-hostile monsters, there weren't any alive to be tamed. But now that there is no one to judge what he does, he decides to tame the slime. And to complete that, he needs to give it a name. Racking his brain, he named it as Shell, considering its relation to the Sheol Reef. While Shell was obviously unable to understand him, just having someone by his side made Heel feel better. But, unlike what he thought, Shell was far greater, or ought I say, smarter. By expanding, Shell helped him reach parts he alone could not. And using hand gestures, he can tell it to move stuff around, or even himself. However, that wasn't all the fun he had. His discoveries have tripled in the last 3 days, of which he used 500 magic stones to electrocute some fishes for food, and create water to drink. Most importantly, Shell was the most comfortable and cool pillow for him, that after a good day of work, he doesn't have to flip over to the cool side. He discovered 10 more slimes while mining, but neither of them were even comparable to Shell. When dawn breaks the next day, he is woken up by a rather frantic Shell. Changing its shape, the little one directed his gaze, and following it, Heel discovers a crashed boat down at the rocks. Riding on Shell, he hurries there in the blink of an eye, only to be bewildered by what he discovers next. Bloodied and battered, there lay a little girl, a muscular hunk, and a frail old one in robes, holding a cane. All of them were green-skinned, announcing to Heel that these were the infamous goblins. Although injured, all of them were fortunately alive, and even if it was an ironclad rule for humans to kill them at first sight, there is no one to rule him here. Unwilling to let them die, he first casts a recovery magic on them, before carrying them to the cave above one at a time. And obviously the hunk was the last of them. Having finally hauled them inside, he treats them to the best of his abilities. And if in case there's a change in their condition, he requests Shell to inform him right away. He is anxious about being attacked, but hopes that his advanced magic can save him. His hands tremble as he grabs the pickaxe again, trying to focus on mining and forgetting about his worries. With each blow at the soil, his next blow grew stronger, and lost in the eventual ASMR of the pickaxe rising and falling, he exclaims at how calming it is. When he looks into his inventory the next time, he discovers 2 new stones, known as the Shining Stone that shone indefinitely, but was useless to him who had the inbuilt night vision. The second one was the Misoji Stone, capable of lifting all sorts of curses. Before he can dig further, Shell came bouncing down the cave, announcing that the goblins were awake, and carrying Heel back on its way back. As they come closer, Heel overhears them talking among themselves, while one of them, a general, was trying to get to his food supplies. The little girl, who was a princess, pleads he doesn't. Sensing Heel's presence behind them, the general immediately alarms the others, who hide behind him, while he holds a blade, fearing the worst. The princess frantically pleads him to put the blade down, but the general is certain that instead of being their savior, Heel was very dangerous. Hearing them speak in the same language as him, Heel is surprised that they are from the same continent as well. But snapping back to reality, he foremost tries assuring them that he means no harm. As their distrust grows, Heel can tell that instead of being hostile, they appear rather afraid of him. And as if in response, the general demands why he is smiling nefariously, if he really doesn't mean any harm, as they say. With no clue at all of them were equally stunned hearing this. And looking at the mirror Shell turned into, Heel understands why. His reflection alone was scary enough to turn John Wick into Gone Wick. And in an attempt to establish a friendliness, he requests they help themselves to the food. Furthermore, he zaps a few fishes out of the water and asks them to feast on them together. Now, terrified of his magical powers, the general demands he just kills them instead of torturing them. When all of a sudden the princess falls on her knees, clenching at her chest as if in pain. Concerned, the others immediately rush to her side as she starts shivering miserably, and distressed by the suddenness, Heel asks if she hasn't been healed completely. Pained by the question, the old one sadly agrees, before revealing with great regret that she has been cursed with the life-shrinking curse. Heel is horrified that such a little child has been cursed, while even the ferocious general weeps at her pain. As he watches, they decide upon sacrificing themselves alongside the princess they have failed to protect. Recalling the Misoji Stone he has in store, Heel hurriedly pleads them to wait because he can cure her. But, having tried everything they could, the others are in disbelief, and even if he isn't too sure himself, Heel is at least willing to give it a shot. Her body starts to glow as soon as he uses it, and because her lifespan was shortened by the curse as well, he uses 79 of the 89 turtle stones as well. At their query full of concern, he explains how the Misoji Stone was capable of negating all curses. When to all of their surprise, a little groan resounds from below, for the little princess returned from the grasps of death itself. A loud bang is followed with an apology as the general smashes his head against the ground as he begs for Heel's mercy, while the 2 others kneel. Heel, who had been roasting fishes around a bonfire, urges they instead come eat with him and introduce themselves while they are at it. The general of the Beldan tribe of goblins introduces himself as El, while Princess Ri the daughter of the king of the tribe, greets Heel, and the robed old man introduces himself as Vari, a goblin shaman. In turn, Heel presents himself as, well, as Heel, a former prince of the kingdom of Sanfeliz. While El assumes his lineage to be the reason behind his powerful magic, Heel politely declines and explains that it was sourced from the stones he had dug up. At his inquiry about their current misery despite their high standings, their faces drop, and El reveals that their hometown had been burned by orcs. Of the royal family, only Ri had managed to survive the mayhem, and while all other goblin clans had rejected them, going to the humans who despised them was a no-go as well. All the survivors ended up seeking refuge, when because of the worsening conditions, the three of them had to escape on a small boat that had eventually crashed on the reef. Ri humbly thanks Heel for taking pity on monsters like them, and although pained by the discrimination, he assures them that it is all right now. With the 79 turtle stones, she has gained 79 days of life, and although her life ahead will be a short one, Ri is thankful to Heel that she can at least die peacefully. The two others were simply grateful as well, but for Heel, it was too early to give up. He speaks about the existence of the turtle stones and how they can dig for a week and get at least a year's worth of life for Ri. Astounded, the two goblins look at each other for a while, before requesting Heel to let them dig as well, and he agrees to it at once. Princess Ri timidly inquires why Heel would be willing to give them the precious turtle stones, and with an assuring look on his face, Heel reasons that he was simply grateful for their presence, and mining was something he simply enjoyed. Tears of gratitude well in the child's eyes, who trembles as she thanks him in a shivering tone. Setting that side, Heel was a little concerned, because they do not have abilities like him, and might end up causing a cave-in while trying to dig. At this, Mr. Advisor reveals that by taming them, Heel can grant them a part of his abilities, including improved mining skills, the ability to earn experience points, and even optimize mining. The general was a little perturbed hearing this, but Heel reasons that it is to simply help them dig, and they are free to decline, for he would give them the stones either way. Vari and El stutter to clarify that while they are more than willing to serve him, they request him to overlook their princess, who, to their utter shock, volunteers to be tamed herself. She reasons that she wants to repay the debt herself by providing whatever help she can. Ri eagerly pleads with Heel to bestow her with a new name, and in lieu of the taming that followed, the General El became Elvan. The shaman Vari became the Honorable Varys, and the Princess Ri they followed became Rihanna. Once underground, Heel retrieves the Shining Stone from his inventory, because unlike him, the others didn't possess built-in night vision. The lot is stupefied at how he summoned it out of nowhere, but willing to explain it while they dig, Heel leads them deeper. On their way down, their optimized mining skill is triggered and starts denoting the shining spots while Heel explains why, before halting to instead show it to them. Tremors reverberate through the cave while massive cracks form as his pickaxe lands, stirring a huge lot of dust and rubble. As they subside, the goblins are shocked to find that a humongous hole had been formed ahead, and Heel explains that while he hadn't started out this powerful, they too will be able to grow to this level soon. Realizing that they also lack an inventory, he gestures Shell to call for the other slimes nearby. And from that day forward, the cave became a lot more livelier. The scene soon shifts to a detour in Heel's memories, back when he lay fending for a small, chained creature, all beaten and bruised. 6 of his siblings snickered before them, while one of them summoned a terrifying fireball to burn both of the weaklings to ashes, and a look of hopelessness grew on Heel's face. He was lost in his thoughts while staring at a vial dangling down his necklace, and snaps back to reality as he hears Rihanna calling his name. There she stood, concerned about his wellness, while Elvin requests him to rest after the tiring day. Clenching the vial tighter, Heel apologizes and reasons that thanks to his Cave King crest, he can dig all day without getting tired. And although that's exactly what she said, he notices an appetizing smell wafting from somewhere nearby. "Yes, today we're having apple pie," speaks Rihanna as the others grow elated, eager to dig in. It had been 6 days since he came to this cave, and 3 since he met the goblins. So in the meanwhile, they put two and two together to create a bathroom, a reservoir to soak in, and one simple kitchen for Rihanna. She anxiously peeks at him as he helps himself to a piece of the pie, and is startled as he starts to choke. She is flooded with relief as Heel starts to shiver at how good it was. With the items and ingredients he had brought with himself, Rihanna would often create a delicacy or two. Elvin had grown accustomed to such joys of mining, while Varys couldn't disagree, for they were also extending the princess's life. With a warm smile, Rihanna thanks them all for their hard work, while Heel thinks to himself that although things are improving, there were many issues yet to be tackled. His lack of resources was just the start of it. For the firewood, he can depend on the lumber he brought and the occasional driftwood. For food, his only options are the fishes, while all of their clothes are slowly deteriorating as well. He considers buying some supplies from any passing by ship with the gems he has, and drifts to think about how he had ordered Elvan from overworking himself just today, as if he is having concerns like a real lord. In search of turtle stones, when he strikes the ground the next time, a huge chunk of the rocks give in, revealing a hollow cavern big enough for him to pass through. As he walks into it, he discovers that the entire cave is covered by stones that have a dull orange glow, very similar to the shining stone he possessed, but not exactly the same. Walking deeper, he notices that the ground beneath his feet feels significantly softer than outside. And just as he wonders what kind of a dirt that is, his eyes fall on what was above him. A ginormous, gigantomorphous, and terriblomorphous black spider dangled down from the ceiling, just above his head. As his eyes glint, Heel is horrified, thinking that he will be eaten by the monster. But way unlike what he thought, the spider gently landed and hurried deeper into the cave. Walking closer, he discovers that it was actually a mother spider, simply trying to protect the little children behind it from an unknown entity like him. As soon as he apologizes, Mr. Advisor notices the lack of hostility from the arachnids and asks if Heel wants to tame them. In the meanwhile, the ones outside were growing uneasy at Heel's absence when Elvin hears footsteps behind him. Words wouldn't leave his mouth, for out of a cave emerged Mr. Heel, closely followed by an army of dangerous cave spiders. While the terrified general huddles far against a wall, forgetting for a moment that he has a princess to protect, Heel assures them that the spider Mama Terran and her children have joined them. Varys was baffled by the sheer size of Tehran, who explains that the cave spiders back in their continent were relatively smaller. They were famous for their silk that is stronger than iron, and infamous for their dangerous habit of eating humans and monsters indifferently. Evidently, the spiders here are plenty amicable, so while the tiny tots play around with the slimes and rocks, their mother carried little shell on her back. Varys further reveals that the dirt Heel had discovered was actually the spider's doo-doo, and it is an exceptional fertilizer for growing crops. When the question rises about where they would farm, Heel offers to show them something special, and leads them to the cave he had emerged from a while ago. As he ushers them, they are surprised to find an intricately carved set of stairs descending, and generously lit by the ever-shining stones. He takes pride in it for having widened the narrow cave on his way back up, while his crest has facilitated the new features. His crest has been upgraded a while ago, and thanks to that Cave King rank 2, he gains the skill of design to change the shape of whatever he mines, process, and synthesize things like rock and sand inside his inventory to create gravel with the workshop skill. Furthermore, he can use the workshop skill and access his inventory even outside the cave. As a final bonus, he can also bless his tamed monsters with night vision. All in all, they had a lot of work to look forward to the next day, while many fishes would be grilled to raise a toast and welcome Terran and the kiddos. The clang of metal striking against metal echoed throughout the next day, as the three men committed themselves to create iron tools. While Varys would plan them, Heel would process the ores, and Elvin would finally assemble it all together. In the meanwhile, Rihanna got to knitting clothes, towels, and such, using the spider silk. Heel would occasionally go visit the spiders, whom he had made in charge of the farming using their stuff. And amidst all of this, one of Terran's kids blossomed as a surprising talent. With multiple pickaxes equipped, It was even comparable to the Cave King himself. When they tried sowing one of the waste apple seeds into the spider dirt, it was in a matter of just a few minutes that a fully grown apple tree sprouts, bearing many plump red fruits. The orange stones that Heel had first encountered in this cave were actually known as sunstones and accelerated the growth of living beings like Terran. Despite trying to search for more, he was only able to gather 678 of them. So, he leaves their management to Rihanna, alongside the planning of the plantation area using them. He was a little worried about her overworking herself, but it was also the reason why he could trust her, because everyone was simply trying their best at whatever they can. Riding on Shell, he would descend down the slide he added to the stairs and continue mining alongside the spiders with a peace of mind and a new goal. Contrary to her small size, Princess Rihanna was actually 15 years old like Heel, and while she had gained 5 more years of life, he is sure that she wants to live more. Because he is the most efficient at mining, he is hence trying to get more turtle stones. However, with the next blow, he uncovers a strange white stone that he decides to set aside for the time being. But as soon as it enters his inventory, Mr. Advisor identifies it as a dragon orb, and it can bring a corpse back to life. Overwhelmed by the discovery, he urges everyone digs around that area for more. But despite their combined efforts with the tiny furballs, it was all for naught. He immediately summons it back outside, because if in case he dies, it wouldn't even be retrieved, much less used. He is startled as Elven's voice echoes from above, and instead of explaining anything at his query, requests he hurries to them at once. He securely places the dragon orb on one of the outcrops. But while Heel ran up the stairs, the orb lolled away and onto the head of one of the many skeletons just busy being dead. The tone of urgency in Elvan's voice grew into desperation by the time he makes it to the surface, because in the distant ocean ahead, the Beldon tribe's ship was in sight. The ship was bobbing amidst the fierce waves, trying its best to stay upright in the brewing storm. Tears well in the goblins' eyes, grateful that their friends, including Elvan's daughter, is still alive. Because it might be troublesome to dock that huge ship, Heel suggests Elvan takes his boat to reach them, and simultaneously summons a hefty pouch filled with gems and such. He offers it as a parting gift that they can use as the money required for their tribe to settle anywhere they want. Elvan is a little confused about what Heel is trying to get at, hearing which, Heel explains that, because their friends are finally here, they should use this chance to leave this treacherous place. He is even elated that he might finally get his hands on a few handy stuff by trading with them once they settle down somewhere. A brief moment of discomfort and sadness falls upon Rhi and Varys, while Elvan silently trembles behind. He was shivering in pain. In a pained voice, he pleads Mr. Heel to not abandon them. Heel is literally blown away by the sheer force of his words, because even if they weren't his tamed monsters, they had still sworn their allegiance to him, and would even make the others swear their loyalty to him. Rhi and Varys agree soon after, claiming with pride that as his subordinates, they ought to stay with their master. While Heel stutters that although he appreciates their concern, they might never get another chance like this. Well aware of it herself, Rhi timidly asks if he will be willing to go with them as well. Heel could not bring himself to speak. Looking at the shoal reef behind him, he remembers the very first plan he had about leaving the place. But now, he simply could not. Realizing this reason behind his silence, Rhi decides that if he won't, they won't leave the place either. Elvan grins back at him while Varys smiles, announcing that they share the same opinion. And although absorbed in the emotional moment, Heel notices something very wrong in the distance that Elvan forgot about. The ship that was being tossed just a while ago had now tilted over, and by the time Elvan took notice, his brethren had been spilled across the waves, trying to stay afloat. Rihanna rushed towards Heel's boat to try and rescue them, while Elvan and Varys followed soon after. But Heel could tell that they won't make it in time. The feeling of heaviness from his past haunted his heart, with the same hopelessness that he felt back when he failed to protect the little creature that had been brutally pulverized by his siblings. As Rihanna watches in utter disbelief, he jumped right off the cliff and straight toward the jagged rocks below. He doused the fire of doubt in his mind and tore towards the drowning goblins ahead, because he was the Cave King. Resolute to remain strong, He uses all of the 8,879 magic stones he has and cast a humongous freeze spell on the water right before he made contact. Rihanna and the lot witness as the raging waves are frozen enough to instead support the sinking ship. And although baffled at the power himself, Heel snaps back and urges Elven hurries over the ice instead of using the boat. With a fierce cry, Elven immediately jumps off the cliff as well. But as soon as he lands, he slips straight into the water because of how slippery the ice was. As Heel curses himself for not thinking this through, Taryn scoops him on her back, while her chisel-like legs help cling to the ice path. Literally following in their mother's footprints, the tiny tots scurry after her while picking up Elvan, who apologizes for having been prejudiced against them previously. Shell and the other slimes came galloping along, and at Heel's command, they transformed. Having transformed into buoyant blocks, they were helpful for the goblins to either climb or cling onto them, while Taryn spewed some webs for them to hold on, and Heel tenaciously kept freezing the waves rushing at them. After a few hours of desperate efforts, and albeit with a few injuries, all of the goblins safely made it to the shore. An elated little Rihanna rushes to thank Heel for saving all 205 of their goblin friends. But before he can even respond, an even louder wail takes over. Elven cried in gratitude that his precious daughter was safe and sound while Fu pleads him to stop with the embarrassing stuff. Heel and the lot can tell that their general is truly happy after having parted with his own daughter to protect their princess, who in the meanwhile thanks Heel for everything he did for them. Heel remains silent for a brief while, before speaking that he wasn't alone. Not only Taryn and her children, but even the slimes and they made it possible. With a warm smile across his face, Heel thanks them for staying by his side. Varys gently bows to thank him for being kind, unlike any humans they knew, but all of a sudden halts to ask about the mysterious someone behind him, who had been tailing Heel for a while now. Plenty curious himself, Heel turns around to have quite a peculiar encounter. A bare-bodied, short-statured someone stood behind him with his hands crossed, and without a single clue himself, Heel asks Varys if he wasn't someone from their ship, because had he been on the island, he was disturbingly naked enough to be eye-catching, so there's no chance to be missed. As Heel introduces himself, curious about who he was, Mr. Anonymous just walks away. He moves over to the temporary camp they set up and starts eating the fishes being roasted there, hinting that he was hungry, and a man of few, or well, no words. Ignoring who and what he was, Heel decides to just get him dressed for the time being. As the next day dawns, his pickaxe reveals quite a sharply cut block of stones, because with the influx of 205 new residents, Heel prepared 41 rooms for 5 each. Things became even livelier when he tamed all of them, but funny enough, the trouble of naming all of them was the most painful experience for him. However, with their ship being wrecked, they could barely salvage any of the supplies, which compelled them to strive even harder at producing the daily necessities that were still scarce. That afternoon, Rihanna came to him with a special cup of something on a tray. Thanking him for his regular hard work, she requests he tries it out, and enticed by the familiar smell and color, Heel hurriedly takes a sip, for it was grape juice. With a chuckle, she reveals that she was fortunate enough to chance upon a few rotten fruits from the ship, which provided her the seeds necessary to grow a bountiful tree using the sunstones. Furthermore, she is positive that although it's a small plantation now, it would grow well in the years to come. Heel is appalled at the mention of years and commends her forethought, while her face turns all reddish. She agrees to try her best in assisting him, when all of a sudden, a huge ruckus drags Heel away. A goblin blacksmith was fuming at the mysterious dwarf, who did nothing but stand and stare at his work. To Heel's surprise, they've been calling the buck-naked guy Mappa, who swoops in to take a closer look at the blacksmith's work, and tosses it away while sighing in disappointment. Frustrated, the smith forcefully hands him his hammer and urges he make something himself before mocking him. But with the hammer in his hands, Mappa's eyes glint with a strange determination. He sees himself on the workbench, and as he raises the hammer, it was clad in a pale glow. Mappa's muscles swell as he hammers the iron with monstrous blows, and not only were they powerful, but also extremely fast and precise. After tempering the iron in water and coals a few times over, The resulting head of a pickaxe was as if a work of art. However, things like pickaxe were tools that required durability, not elegance. With intentions of testing it out against his doubts, Heel tries mining at the lowest floor where he had been mining previously, and alongside the wall, all of his doubts were just blown away. As he praises the item, Mappa responds with a like, but past him, Heel notices something terribly amiss. He could no longer find the dragon orb he had placed on the outcrop previously. But as he looks past the boulder, he is alarmed. The boulder was actually a mound on top of what looked like a grave, and its shape and size was oddly familiar. He realizes that the thing he had missed to see in the shadows before were actually Mappa's remains, and combined with the dragon orb, a legendary blacksmith had been hence revived. Heel wasn't sad at the loss of the orb, but was instead relieved that he found a new comrade thanks to it. With the increased quality of tools, they first built a proper coast outside, before rebuilding the wrecked ship of the goblins. Mining was definitely their biggest priority, during which he found a few more friendly slimes, and once tamed, they provided ample help with the transportations. While everything was going in a peaceful sync, the number of turtle stones they found henceforth started to decrease. Upon learning this, the thought of the smiling Rihanna assuring him that everything was okay, when it definitely wasn't, pained him a lot. As of latest, they've only managed to increase her lifespan by 10 years. And while he was sure that she definitely wanted to live longer, it wasn't actually her. It was Heel that wanted Rihanna to stay together with them for many more years to come. He wanted to develop this reef and thrive together, but while he was lost in these thoughts, his blows unveiled yet another cave. And past that gaping hole, expanded an entire room. Its walls were decorated with intricate carvings, with an even majestic pedestal. Instead of being uninhabited, Heel just feels that a civilization might have actually existed at this forsaken place. A strange oval-shaped golden object rested atop the pedestal, and with plans of simply collecting them, for now, he retrieves them. The first find was a heart stone, which would act as an artificial core for a doll that he could create by combining materials in the inventory. As for the golden egg he discovered and retrieves, Mr. Advisor identifies it as a change stone, capable of evolving a monster. Although he wasn't totally sure how it worked out, he was pretty scared to learn that it changed a monster into a totally different species, but would inherit the previous body's renewed age and personality. Sitting around a bonfire by the crashing waves, he reveals about its existence to the others, while Mappa helps himself to the fishes. At his query, Varys in turn reveals that every goblin knew about the Change Stone, for it was mentioned in their legends. He further elaborates that the hobgoblins and leaf goblins they all knew about were originally regular goblins like them. However, in search of strength, a few evolved as hobgoblins, while those intent on residing deep within the forests turned into leaf goblins, all thanks to the Change Stone. Heel finally gains a brief insight into evolution thanks to this, and inquires if Elven was a hobgoblin as well. The general denies, while Varys explains that Elvan was born with that body, and Rhee wanders off to wonder about how the bulky child of an Elven might have looked like. As Varys exclaims in surprise at the sight of the legendary stone, Heel relays that following his crest's advice, the stone evolved a monster, alongside renewing its lifespan. The others are astounded hearing this, and when Heel asks if they want to try it, Varys politely reasons that although he is curious, he isn't intent on changing his body, while Elven reasons that his muscles are too cool to be lost. However, Rhee did not speak. She slowly stutters that she wants to help Heel in any way she can, even if it is by using little magic or such. But she couldn't just bring herself to ask for something so precious. Varys praises her idea, because as goblins, they are inherently incapable of using any magic at all. And even Heel agrees, because not only could she grow magically, but the evolution would also help her live longer. Hearing his wish for her to, Rihanna firmly announces her resolve to evolve, and Heel hands her the Change Stone. With the stone tightly clasped in her hands, Rihanna thinks from the very bottom of her heart about her wish to stay beside Mr. Heel, and the Change Stone starts to glow. Its blinding light was too overwhelming for the others who cover their eyes, but as the light fades away, their eyes widen in awe. Rihanna had grown into an extremely beautiful elf-like being, but while she was confused by the change in her body and stature, our dear Mappa was overwhelmed, for she evolved naked. Heel's drowsy eyelids part a few hours later, when he suddenly remembers Rihanna's evolution from when he was last awake. Responding to his call, the same Rihanna's face greets his eyes with a downward look. His eyes flare open as he realizes that he had been sleeping on her lap all along. He panics as his embarrassment takes over and immediately jumps away as Rihanna reveals that he had collapsed out of nowhere. He recalls how Mappa's nosebleed was strong enough to knock him out and discovers that he had been asleep for an entire quarter of a day, for it was still night outside. He confirms with Rihanna if she was feeling all right, because with her change, she had gained a rather humane look. In a disheartened tone, she speaks that she didn't really like her old self. She had been cursed at birth, which nabbed her lifespan and growth. As a princess, she became a subject to public mockery, because her sisters were far beautiful, and although her parents tried helping her at first, they eventually gave up and started ostracizing her instead. As such, while using the Change Stone, her wish had been influenced by her little desire to become beautiful. She apologizes for using the precious treasure for such a selfish desire of hers. But even Heel could tell that ever since he came to this island, he felt changed. Disregarding her personal wishes, he is simply relieved that she has a new life to look forward to. And it would be a waste if her body didn't evolve the way she wanted it to. Without Heel, none of it could have ever come to pass. So Rihanna decides to repay the favor by offering her everything to him as well. As she clutches his hand in her own, he grows a little perturbed at the moment, and jolts as he realizes that Mappa and Shell had been silently watching it all for a while now. Using the webs from Terran and the others, she weaved a new set of clothes for herself. And although awestruck by her beauty, many of the goblins couldn't believe this change. However, when they saw her working hard, like her former self, the resemblance familiarized them. Having grown capable of using magic, she dedicated herself to studying it from Heel and Varys, alongside martial arts from Elvin. However, that wasn't all. Reyna could finally help out with the physical chores that she could not previously, and while staring at her for a moment, he flinches as a curious Varys suddenly pops up behind him. Flustered, he clarifies that he wasn't really looking at her legs when he obviously was. But Varys instead praises him because that's where her crest of farmer was at. Although unknowingly, back when Heel had entrusted Rihanna with the plantations, he made a really wise decision because her crest made crops plentiful. Heel was simply bewildered to learn that even goblins possess crests, because to his limited knowledge, only humans were capable of handling such powers. At this, Varys displays his own crest of Sorcery King that graced his palm, and was a really powerful and rare one, that only one of Heel's brother possessed it. Unfortunately for Varys, he couldn't even wield magic being a goblin. Heel grows saddened hearing this, while Varys reasons that despite the drawback, he was fortunate enough to just study about magic and become a shaman. Before Heel could even propose a chance at finding another Change Stone, Varys politely requests they quit this pointless conversation and tend to the matter at hand. On the day before, Varys had proposed a plan to reclaim land from the sea and expand the island, because the need to grow crops was dire. They were also considering to create a bigger space for the kids to play while they were at it. Varys pleads he just gives him the raw materials required instead of overworking himself after gathering them as well. But Heel was intent on trying something while he can, and if in case he fails, Varys can take over. Finally capable of using the workshop skill outside the cave, he had a plan in mind, and in lieu of that, he first combines stone and sand to create gravel, then process it to form crude rocks, and then design them into rock blocks. Using a fair amount of magic stones, he summons the power to control the rocks and place them in the planned locations. He'd create water using water magic, and then mix it with spider dirt to create a substitute for cement, and then use it as an adhesive between the blocks. The goblins were dumbstruck witnessing such magic, but the others were used to such arts that defied logic. A beautiful expanse of leveled land was hence created, and the children rushed to play in the beach, all elated. Forgive that poetic detour. Heel was overjoyed at the smile of innocence on their faces, while Rihanna comes promising to work hard and create a field of bountiful crops. But, as Heel turns to appreciate her, a humongous bird swooped in and makes away with their legendary blacksmith. "Mappa!" screamed everyone at the sight of the giant avian known as killer birds, while Heel hurriedly urges everyone to head back inside the cave. Elvin's daughter, Fu, notices a fellow child tripping over. But as she rushed to help him out, Rihanna let out a scream of panic. One of the many killer birds was rushing in towards them. But in the very next instance, its head was just gone. Heel recognized the burly hand grasping the blade responsible, for it was the fearsome goblin general and the doting father, Elvan. For having dared to attack his precious daughter, he slaughters the birds with a flurry of blows, and although amazed by his monstrous strength, Heel sure took his time to snap back and assist him. Because by the time he did, someone else screams, "Shield!" He turns around to find that Rihanna had spawned a magic shield to protect their backs from one of the birds, and insists they focus on attacking while she covers for them. The three of them gradually engage in a mutually symbiotic cycle of defend and attack when Varys announces from above that everyone else had safely made it to the cave. He urges they hurry as well, and Elvan pleads the same while offering to guard their retreat. However, Heel would not leave him alone. He summons the Heartstone from his inventory, alongside 300 rocks to be used as materials for doll production. When the birds attack the next time, a humongous pair of hands rise to apprehend them, and those belong to the large-sized golem that Heel created. In the meanwhile, the bird that had tried swallowing Mappa was evidently struggling, and after failing to bear with the outrageous taste, puked him out, while Shell hurries to catch him in the nick of time. With the last of their worries having been dealt with, Heel requests Elvan if he can gather the remaining birds above. Willing to follow, Elvan hurls his axe away, which was tied to a rope at its rear end. He hurriedly fastens the rope around his left arm, while simultaneously tugging to control the axe through the rope, and lassos it around the birds while choking the living hell out of them. Made out of spider silk, there wasn't even a chance for them to break out of it, and willing to seize the chance, Heel urges them to get down against the ground. As they comply, he unleashes a massive blast of the frost-related spell of Blizzard. Sourced using the power of over 9,000 magic stones, the magic overwhelmed the birds in an instant, freezing them on spot. Shrieks and screeches resound as the few remainders decide to flee, and conclusively, it was their sweet victory. Cheers echo as the goblins rejoiced in celebration, and although smeared in blood, Elvan praises Heel's power with great joy. Really concerned about his safety, Rihanna came rushing towards him when all of a sudden her legs gave in. Her body was trembling as she reasoned that she had been really terrified, but with a soft expression, reasoned that because Heel was by her side, she was all right. Although flustered by her confession, Heel shows her his own trembling legs, for he had almost pissed his pants as well. The two share a chuckle, and before long, all the other members of their family swarmed around them to raise a toast. Although it wasn't much, Heel finally found people who accepted him. He finally felt as if even someone as incompetent as him could become kind of like an actual feudal lord. But for one sure thing, some roasted killer bird meat was on the menu today. The carcasses of the killer birds were carefully slit into huge chunks after skinning it. The feathers became quite popular among the innocent ones, while the appetizing smell of the meat being fried, roasted, and boiled for stew emanated throughout the island. Raising a toast to their master Heel, all of them eagerly took part in the hearty feast. Well, maybe exclude the golem. It had been many days since they had eaten actual meat, so obviously it was nothing short of a celebration for them. For Heel, such a great banquet was unprecedented even in comparison with his royal life. As Rihanna hands him a plateful, he gratefully helps himself to it, but as soon as he took his first bite off of it, man was he lost in the delicious greasy taste. Glad that her cooking was to his liking, Rihanna also hands him a bowl of the soup, and although it was definitely tasty as well, he couldn't help but notice that this meat had a different taste to it. Rihanna giggles that he noticed it, because each section of the killer bird had a different taste to itself. Its wings and legs tasted like chicken, while the breasts taste like beef, and the shoulders taste like pork. While further attacks from the birds could be dangerous, they could also look at them as a good source of food. Varys walks up to him and suggests they have the golem stand watch outside the cave, because killer birds do not attack anyone bigger than them in terms of size. Furthermore, Varys proposes to build a few decent watchtowers and sturdy walls that will protect their crops from saltwater damage. Heel agrees, but requests that he at least lets him process the rocks required. When all of a sudden, he notices a crouched someone behind him, chewing a little loudly. Elvin's daughter, Fu, sat munching on a rib and staring hard at him. He is a little unsettled when she starts hopping around as if scanning him. He knew who she was, but couldn't quite remember her name. And realizing this, Fula, or the former Fu, reminds him of it. Heel apologizes about forgetting the name he himself had gifted her, and politely inquires if she wanted something from him. With an indifferent look, Fula straightforwardly asks about why he is so strong. She is bewildered as he replies that it was because of the magic power increasing stones he dug up while mining, and eagerly requests to try and dig them as well. Rihanna gently reminds her about how she must first evolve herself to use magic, but Fully was undeterred. She firmly announces that she is ready to evolve as well, but Heel politely apologizes again because he simply doesn't have any more change stones on himself. Her pops popped up behind her, demanding Full to stop bothering him. Elvan apologizes to Master Heel, reasoning that she was simply bent on growing stronger, while she argues that she simply cannot help it with a strong father like him. Elvan is overjoyed hearing his cold daughter speak in admiration of him, and Heel warmly announces that if she does dig up a change stone, she can freely use it. Fula couldn't contain herself hearing this, and immediately stormed off, promising to be of help to him because she was good at mining. While her concerned father confirmed this with Heel, Fule requests the stuffed Mappa to make her a pickaxe like heels. Of the 1,800 magic stones he possessed, he used 800 of them on Rihanna, who felt a sudden change within herself and inquisitively asked him about it. Heel replies that he has simply increased her magic power temporarily, and although flustered, Rihanna promises to make his precious gift worth it. Elvan rushes in with a heaped plate, urging them both to eat more, to get stronger, as if a grandma on Thanksgiving. On this eventful day, they completed the entire reclamation of the land and feasted like there was no tomorrow. This was the very first Memorial Day in the Sheol Reef. As the next day dawns, Heel sneezes quite loudly because Rihanna had decided to create an underground freezer to store the leftover meat. They shiver because she had used all of her increased magic power to build it. And with the steel doors sealing it tight, the preserves would hopefully last them for over half a year. Obviously, Mappa had been the one who built the big steel door, and surprisingly, also the one who designed the interior cellars. But that wasn't all that the dwarf had in store. Mappa planned and renovated the entire forge to an outstanding degree, and having finally grown capable of using magic, Rihanna started becoming more independent. Under Varys and Elvan's keen guidance, the fortification of their coast proceeded smoothly enough for Heel to return to mining with no worries. Full of the miners surprised hearing that no cave-ins or accidents have happened till now, and unable to explain himself properly, Heel reasons that it was thanks to his Cave King crest. Regardless of what optimization it offered, it was still unbelievable to Fully that Heel had no accidents with neither experience nor idea about mining. She notices the dire need for some proper ventilation in the area and cleaning the accumulating dust, which could affect their lungs. Heel is terrified learning that accumulating gases could be poisonous, or even worse, explosive. He commends her vast knowledge about mines and mining, which she gratefully claims to be because of her early interest, and specifically, her crest on her collarbone. While it wasn't even comparable to his Cave King, her miner's crest was quite handy. Heel was elated finding himself a guru to trust and someone who is eager to teach him. With only her experience, and without a Mr. Advisor or an automatic inventory, Fully lagged in terms of quantity and speed. But considering her intuition and efficiency, she is his strongest competitor since Terran Jr. Once when they were busy mining, Fully asks if he had someone like a father, and with a bitter look on his face, Heel sadly stutters, "I did." Fula was certain that his father must be a great man. But the sadness on Heel's face spoke otherwise. Irrespective of how far he was from them, he was still afraid of them, because they were the actual monsters with monstrous powers and absolutely no mercy. When he asks if Fully wants to become as strong as Elvin, she denies it in a manner that makes it an obvious yes. He silently chuckled while she made a significant blow, indicating that there was empty space behind it, which to her fortune might be a cave with a change stone. The room they unearthed this time was way larger, but designed with similar intricate carvings. Furthermore, there were hollow spaces where strange statues stood dormant. As soon as it clicks to him, he immediately shouts for Fully to wait. But it was too late, and the statue starts to move towards her with glowing eyes. He hurriedly whips up a shield to block the fiery blast it shoots using magic. Heel first confirmed the bewildered Fully's safety, and then notices that unlike the golem he make, these lot were capable of using magic. He fends again as one of them even attacks with a sword. But as his attention diverted to one, he was completely surrounded by 4 others. Unfazed by their numbers, he crosses his hands and unleashes an entire barrage of storm spells to shove them away. The magic this time was so darn strong that the heavy golems were just hurled against the walls. Fool stutters an apology for triggering them thoughtlessly, but Heel pardons her because even he hadn't expected such powerful golems that were now destroyed. At his command, Shell bounces away to inform the others to temporarily stop mining and prevent any more frightening discoveries like this. In the meanwhile, Fully chances upon a golden gem and eagerly inquired if it was a change stone. Unfortunately for her, Mr. Advisor identifies it as a sorcery stone, capable of storing magic, and is a potential item for doll creation. She is a little disheartened hearing this, but freaks out as Mappa silently appears through the darkness like a smooth criminal. While the two exclaim at his sudden arrival, Mappa walks past them and picks up the huge sword of the fallen golem and even starts dancing around. Whistling to a lovely tune, he cheerfully made his way through the entrance and out of their sight. Fully is simply confused if all humans are crazy naked like Mappa, but firmly denying that accusation, Heel instead emphasizes at how happy Mappa looked for once. He wonders if the swords had to do something with it, but when he tried picking one up, it simply won't budge. Even with their combined efforts, the huge-ass blade didn't move an inch. Using his brain, Heel tried to retrieve it directly into his inventory, but Mr. Advisor reveals that besides the stuff he mines, he cannot collect anything else. He laments that he cannot collect any processed items right now, but when he considers breaking it apart, even his crest failed to make it through. However, Heel wasn't done yet. The next time he strikes at it, the sword finally breaks, but so did his pickaxe. He is a little sad that Mappa's special axe gave in, but the collected bits of the sword turned out to be orichalcum, a legendary metal of incredible durability and magical affinity. Unable to lift it up, Heel is even more confused because the description even quotes it to be lighter than metal. The scene shifts to a raging Elvan, who was trying his hand at lifting the mysterious sword that Mappa had brought over. Rihanna notices a curious Heel, Fule and Shell, emerge from a cave behind them, and replies that all of them were trying to lift the sword, and it's finally Elvin's turn. As Heel reveals that the sword is actually made out of 300 orichalcum ingots, Fule immediately rushes to plead her father to stop with the impossible. However, with a final roar, Elvan manages to haul the blade over his shoulders, while the crowd cheers for him. Heel is awestruck as he spots the great warrior crest glowing on his shoulder blade and explaining the sudden spike in his strength. But before Elvan could flaunt it, his grip on the hilt loosened, and the blade's weight tipped him over. The onlookers are shocked as he fell limp after hitting his head hard against the ground, and Heel rushed to cast a recovery spell on him. He asks Elvan to refrain from doing such dangerous stunts, but is even more injured when Fully crashes into his stomach. Seeing her shiver, Elvan is terribly concerned for her, who breaks into tears and blames him for worrying her. Heel and Rihanna smile as Elvan apologizes and hugs his daughter, when from the corner of his eyes, Heel spots Mappa quietly making away with the sword of concern. Thrown into a crucible, the orichalcum melts in the sweltering temperatures of their forge. Dwarves were noble beings who enjoyed working with rare metals, and combined with their incredible strength, techniques, and spiritual arts, they were legendary. Witnessing Mappa's dedicated fervor at working with the orichalcum, Heel is finally certain that he is a true dwarf. Mappa offers his work up to Heel, and by just holding it in his hands, the Cave King was blown away. The formulated pickaxe was unbelievably light, like the description had previously mentioned. Smelting all the orichalcum, Mappa creates all sorts of tools. And although he was definitely the real deal as a dwarf, Heel wasn't too sure of the part about him being naked. The scene is followed by a loud crash that resounds when Elvan's axe surprisingly bounces off of something unbelievably durable. The great warrior felt a great sense of excitement, dropped his dual axes, and slammed his hands into each other, ready to face the challenger with his brute force and bare hands. In the meanwhile, Fulla took a deep breath inside the mines and confirmed that the air was perfectly fit. They created a simple ventilation hole upon Fullis's recommendation, while Mappa devised a complicated tidal-powered fan to constantly push fresh air from outside. Despite their eagerness to mine as soon as possible, the pair decide to wait for the entire cavern to be properly aerated. Eventually, the bored Fulla decided to visit the forge for the day, while Heel decides to start planning a few golems. With the 14 artificial hearts and 10 magic stones he found from the destroyed golems, he decided to create new guard golems. While Mappa's dealing with the creation of equipments, his drawing stick just went on and on as his thoughts directed. And before realization dawns that he had been carried away, the menacing sketch of a golem with all sorts of weapons lay before his eyes. With a goofy look on his face, he continues adding more details to it, like a child excited for his new toy. He jolts as he finds Rihanna silently peeking at his work of art from behind. Flustered, he hurriedly erases it, as she requests him to spare some time. When he asks about the reason behind this rare request, Rihanna claims that it would be more fun if he sees it for himself, with a coy look on her face. As she leads him, they pass through a well-kept storage room for the Sunstones, and when they arrived at the plantation area, Heel's jaw dropped. The barren coast had been turned into a paradise of all kinds of beautiful flora. He spots apples, grapes, lemons, and even palm trees in the digits now, and commends Rihanna for making it into such a grand orchard. She laments that as of now, there isn't enough produce for all. But as Heel watches, she takes a stance against an innocent palm tree. With a violent cry, she punches the trunk, and as she does, a few coconuts detach and fall from the cluster above. With a furious kick, she slices their tops and gracefully catches them while Heel stood dumbfounded. To the coconut water, she adds some lemon juice and a few chunks of ice to keep it chilled. Transferring them into jars, she serves them in glasses made of wood, while the overall mixing increases the volume well enough for all of them to enjoy in moderation. As he takes a sip, Heel wonders about her monstrous growth, but as the taste hit him, he exclaims at the refreshing, sweet, yet perfectly acidic balance of the drink. Rihanna's eyes lit up hearing his praise when he hears Elvan's voice in the distance. Accompanied by Varys and several others, Elvan carried something quite huge on his shoulders. At his query, Heel affirms that he was ready to restart mining, but couldn't help but notice the shell-like carapace he brought along. Elvan proudly claims that it was the shell of a creature known as Satan, that he just defeated at the island's rear shore. He shows off its incredible build, that even repelled his axe without much of a dent. At Heel's confusion about how he defeated it, he reveals that he had simply forced it open, which was only possible because of his absurd strength. As they force its shell open, Varys emptied a suspicious-looking organ into a tub that was soon filled with a strange liquid. As soon as the curious Mappa licks it with his finger, he falls hard on his back and starts trembling violently. With a sinister look, Varys reveals that the liquid possessed poisonous properties, depending on how it was processed. But that was just a commendable joke, for he clarifies that nothing but a purple dye was extracted from the liquid. But Heel casts a recovery spell just in case. Starting from killer birds and Satan shells to ancient golems, the number of their enemies kept rising, and to deal with them all, Heel creates an entire legion comprised of 14 new golems, half of them considerably bigger than their counterparts. Including his first creation, There were 15 in total, of which numbers 6 to 15, that is 10 of them were imbued with magic stones. Of the 10, 2 specialized in defensive magic, while the others picked an elemental magic, 2 each. 2 golems with ice magic, 2 with fire magic, 2 with lightning, and similarly, 2 more with wind magic. Heel notices a few frantic goblins sounding the emergency bell on top of the defensive wall, and announcing that numerous Satan shells were invading them from the one side, where the walls were still incomplete. As they rush over, they discover over 50 of those indestructible spiky donuts climbing on the walls. At Heel's demand, Varys reveals that Satan shells can easily endure heat and cold, but not lightning. Heel requests Elvan to leave this ordeal to him, because he wants to test the new golems, to which he agrees at once, but asks he calls for him right away if things turn south. Heel confirms with Rhianna if she is capable of using lightning-attributed magic, and with her confirmation, they move over to his golem number 1. Extending its arms, it helps Heel up, who in turn helps Rhianna, and with both of them atop its joined palms, Heel takes command of his golem army. The Satan shells had already climbed over the wall by the time they made it, and as they hurled themselves at them, Heel commands the 2 defensive golems to guard, and number 6 and 7 comply. Zeus rages as Rhianna summons a thunderbolt and wreaks havoc upon the crawling digits. The golems were as if mobile forts to Elvan and Varys, while their master Heel dictated their mobility. Equipped with the lightning attribute, golems 14 and 15 joined the fray, and their power were quite disastrous. Stunned, the Satan shells halted momentarily and retorted by spewing their special liquid capable of paralyzing their targets. The defensive duo relentlessly fended them, and standing atop golem number 1, Rhianna wasted neither mana nor chance at electrocuting them. With the defensive twins, the damage intake was nullified, and with relentless attacks from their end, the Satan shells were subdued in no time. Unwilling to let their harvest go to waste, Rhianna decides to have the golems carry the Satans to the freezer. Following Heel's orders, all 15 golems scooped the spiky donuts with their hands, when all of a sudden, Rhianna flinches as she spots a struggling Satan preparing to attack the clueless Heel. She throws herself at him and takes the poisonous attack herself, while a swift, clean blow kills the Satan for good. The assailant, Elvan, confirms the thankful Heel's safety, who then turns to thank Rhianna. However, his face turns bright red as he discovers her laying atop him, all drenched in the paralyzing poison that made it difficult for her to even move away from him. Embarrassed, he hurriedly casts a recovery spell on her and immediately distances himself. When he turns again, he is shocked yet flustered to find her all sticky and rushes away to get some water to help her clean. But on his way back, he spots a sudden shine from within one of the Satan shells. Upon close inspection, he chances upon a pearl, which was an extremely rare find. Rhianna exclaimed at how pretty it was, and without a use for it himself, Heel offers it to her as a gift. He explains that he simply doesn't understand its value, but with such a precious gift in her hands, Rhianna is all flustered. She starts stuttering while her face is all red, and with a frantic apology, she returns it and storms away. Dull as lead, Heel simply couldn't understand why. After mining for the entire next day, Heel announces a break to all of his fellow miners, but Fuller requested to keep at it for a while more. Understanding her dedication, Heel reminds her to at least eat on time, to which she agrees at once, because Rhianna's cooking was simply too good to be refused. He leaves Golem number 1 to report in case of any accidents in his absence. Fuller had an incomparable zeal to mine, and with the Golem's protection, their mining efficiency had only incremented. With the lot many Satan shells defeated on the day before, their full course menus were obviously comprised of the spiky donuts, while Mappa took the meaning of plateful serving to a whole new level. The Satan shells seemed to have nested somewhere around them, because they kept appearing on their shore and eventually became a sturdy supply for food, strong shells, and dye. Things would keep sweeping up their shore from time to time, but what came next was more than just blessings. With the dawn of the next day, Heel witnessed the true elegance of the dye known as Tyrian purple for the very first time. Under Varys' guidance, a few goblins specializing in clothwork created it out of the liquid they collected from the Satan shells. Their quality was far superior to any that Heel had seen, and spotting Elvan walking up to them, they suggest he come witnesses the same. However, they could only be confused by what followed next, because the ever-cheerful Elvan they knew had a grave look on his face and he did not speak why. Clenching his fist, he requests Heel to follow him to the coastline in a gravely serious tone. As they do, they discover that a crowd had already formed near the edge. The thing of concern was a corpse, very unlike the goblins, with yellow hair, a muscular build, and tusks. The surrounding goblins immediately knew that it was an orc and started distancing themselves from it, when Elvan further explains that the orc had been caught in the embankment and pulled to the surface by them. However, his voice now was tinted with a deep, founded anger and disgust, because as the seal on the orc's clothes indicated, it was the very tribe of orcs that had destroyed the Beldon tribe's hometown. The goblins were reasonably scared, but as one of them starts kicking at the orc to vent his anger, the others immediately follow suit. Heel pleads them to wait, but they simply would not. And when he turns to seek help from Elvan and Varys, they wouldn't respond either. Heel realizes that he simply couldn't step in here, because the orcs were the sworn enemies of the Beldon tribe after all. However, a certain someone else could, and they did. The princess of the Beldan tribe was furious at their disrespectful behavior, and demands if her tribe has fallen so low that they even disgrace the dead. The goblins timidly reason and remind her about how these orcs had massacred their friends and families, and even pinned her father, their king, to the walls using swords to set an example. Rhianna could certainly feel the rage past their fear, but she still couldn't allow them to respond in kind. She announces that as the master of the island, Mr. Heel is the only one to decide what would happen to anyone or anything that drifts here. Rhianna kneels before the same, apologizing in the goblin's stead, and although uncertain himself, Heel silently thanks Rhianna. He strides ahead, resolving himself as the chief of the island and the one to take responsibility for his people. Standing before them, he speaks that although their anger was understandable, he didn't want them to humiliate the dead. Bowing before them, he sincerely requests them to heed his selfish request and contain their anger. The goblin lot are alarmed watching their master bow before them, and immediately plead he doesn't. Heel requests Varys to handle the burial of the orc corpse, but as he stared into the distance, he realizes that it wasn't just one corpse they were dealing with. The embankment before them was completely flooded with flocks of corpses. One by one, they pulled in 24 corpses in total. And they weren't just orcs in the digits. There were dog-like bipedal creatures known as kobolds, who allied with the orcs and were the goblins' bitter enemies as well. With so many of them dead and injured, Heel debates if some infighting had caused it, while Varys wonders how they came to this remote area of all places. Elvan calls for Heel, and the two distance themselves from the crowd, and explains that while all of them have wounds caused from battle, a few of them possess really strange and horrible wounds. He further elaborates that the terrible scars were caused by neither axes nor sword, but fangs that were big unlike any that Elvan had ever seen. At an even scarier degree of one of the corpses, half of it seemed to have been blown away by some extreme heat that was impossible to conjure even with fire magic. Conclusively, instead of an infighting, they were attacked by something else that was way stronger. Elvan didn't want to draw a conclusion just yet, but did understand their needs to tighten their guard and stay on the lookout for armed ships. Heel assigned Varys to deal with the burials, while Elvan was to gauge and fortify their defenses. Alongside Rhianna, he moved to scavenge whatever possible from the debris. And even if it made him feel bad to tattle with the belongings of the dead, it wasn't like they had a choice either. Everything was either in terrible condition or in considerable need of repair. Lost in the process, Heel heard a strange whimper, but after looking around and confirming it with Rhianna, there was nothing that could have made such a sound. However, it happened again, and this time, it came from a trembling crate amidst the rubble. Despite Rhianna's efforts, she could not force it open, leaving it for Heel's discerning eye that found a magic lock sealing it. He cast the spell of pick to, well, pick it, and slowly but surely, the lock came undone. As he tried getting a closer look at it, something agile sprang from within and straight at his face. Catching it in the nick of time, Heel finds himself a white, fluffy puppy struggling in his hands. Its struggle bore fruit as it managed to escape his hands and climb onto his head and fugitively run over him, while Heel frantically tried catching it again. Eventually, it stops after clinging onto the back of his head and, of all things, starts to shiver. Heel gave out a shriek as something wet came down his back, only to discover that the tiny twat had loitered his shirt. Rihanna chuckled while she gently held the puppy, and as Heel would recognize later on, the little child was a kobold. She caresses it with her hands, because even if the kobolds were their enemies, no child was guilty of anything, and she hoped that the others would understand the same. The next day when Heel returned to mine, an explosive lot of rubble shot up, because with each passing day, the quality of Mappa's equipments only compounded. Neither did Heel possess any knowledge about battles, nor was he aware of what mysterious enemy they were up against this time. Hence, the best thing he could do was return to mining. Either way, the raw materials required to defend the island were being collected, but the amount of magic stones Heel would find started to decrease. As of now, he has enough for himself, but if he is to increase Rihanna's magic power or help the evolved Fule and Varys someday, he'll be definitely needing more of them. But when he was screening through his inventory, he spots an odd nameless find. Shaped like a walnut, it wasn't even identified by Mr. Advisor to Heel's utter confusion. But when he retrieves it outside, he is baffled to discover that it is actually a seed, and no stone of sorts. He turns around to find Fule rushing at him, requesting him to follow her for a specific problem brewing on the surface above. The proud General Elvan was making a face that would definitely get him enlisted from the army, to try and calm the little puppy down, but the little child simply wouldn't stop crying. Witnessing his failure, the spider mama Terran decided to take things in her hands, but the terrifying sight of her maw absolutely traumatized the tiny tot. Despite their combined efforts and Mappa dancing around with a pair of maraca, they couldn't soothe it. Fule immediately crashes into Elvin's back with a kick, realizing that his faces were making it worse. The great warrior recalled how he had tried the same when Fule was a child, and had simply scared her even more. Heel walks up to them, requesting Elvin go easy on their little friend, and at his sight, the puppy was immediately calm. It sprang off of Shell and tore towards Heel, before climbing onto his face and licking it with pure affection as its tail wagged in symphony. Fule could tell that it had been looking forward to meeting him since waking up from his nap, and getting quite the greeting from Elvan and the lot. Rihanna further emphasizes that by peeing on him, the tiny tot probably considered him as his father, while Varys affirms that it's kobold's nature to imprint on others. However, curious about the box that Varys was tattling with, Heel asked if there was something more inside, and to their discovery, there indeed was. Varys replies that upon a close inspection, he discovered a false bottom at its shallow interior, which was impenetrable even with an orichalcum knife. Heel gently hands the child to Rihanna and proceeds with yet another attempt at picking it magically. The false bottom complies and collapses, and as they eagerly peek in, they discover a strange white diamond-shaped stone, accompanied by 3 different books. Each of them were about the Tiberius tribe, and dealt with a different subtopic each. One about their history, another about their techniques, and lastly, their scriptures. This made Heel consider if the tiny tot belonged to the Tiberius tribe as well. Mr. Advisor identifies the stone as a thought stone, literally capable of storing thoughts. Elvin and Rihanna were confused yet curious, but the look on Varys' face was that of seriousness, and he did not utter a single word. Before Heel could ask him about it, the thought stone in his hand starts glowing brightly, and the brightness only increased. The luminous thoughts took form as he places it on a table, and as if a projector, it displayed the hologram of a female kobold. With a staff in her hands and an authoritative air around her, Heel could tell that she was certainly someone of noble lineage. Rihanna could only exclaim at her beauty when, of all things, the hologram starts speaking. The female kobold foremost thanks them for having undone the seal on the chest, because she was Alamina, the queen of the Tiberius tribe of kobolds, and the puppy they found within the box was her newborn baby. Elvin recognized the word Tiberius and was overcome by a sudden distaste, but it was yet to worsen for all of them, because as Alamina would reveal eventually, their ship was being chased by a creature of the myths, the legendary Leviathan. The queen explained that after separating with the orcs at a chaotic note, they had escaped to the sea, only to end up being chased by the Leviathan, against whom neither their weapons nor magic would work. Well aware that her request might be unreasonable, she requests her unknown audience to adopt her innocent child as their own. Albeit not enough, she offered the two strongest warriors of their tribe, who had been tasked with protecting the chest, alongside 3 books that were forbidden to outsiders. All of a sudden, panicked voices echoed through the hologram, requesting their queen to escape, and the image of Alamina starts to flicker as if the end was near. She gently pleads they let her child hear her last words, if possible, and with a warm look on her face spoke to the little one that she would always love him. With that, the thought disconnected, leaving the onlookers with nothing but pity and fear. But not the great warrior. Elvan clicks his tongue hearing all of this, and scoffs at the shameless Tiberius who would leave their kid to someone unknown, and even assigned escorts who were nowhere to be seen. Rihanna immediately retorts, pleading he be mindful of his words. But announcing his decision to inform the others on guard, Elvin walks away without a word. Heel could guess that the Beldon were already aware of the Tiberius tribe, and didn't share a good relation either. With a disheartened look, fully discloses that they had been engaged in constant territorial wars with them. And in one of those, her elder brother and Elvin's first child had sadly passed away. Heel understood the general's distrust and hatred, but couldn't help but appreciate how, despite that, he bore no ill will toward the child. Fully emphasizes that regardless of how ruthless of a warrior her father might be, he would never hate a child. While Varys explains that Elvin had instead blamed himself for failing to protect his son, he reveals that even he had lost his younger brother to the Tiberies, but held no grudges against their little friend. Heel announces his decision to take him in, and obviously no one could speak against the child's cuteness. He was a little concerned because despite referring to him as her baby, the little one had no name. Rihanna suggests that Alamina might have intentionally avoided speaking about it so that the new parents might treat him as their own, hearing which, Heel requests if she had any ideas that they could rely on. Giving it a good thought, she suggests the name Riel, which was immediately accepted without arguments, and the tiny tot was blessed with the same. With the naming completed, Riel was recognized as Tamed Monster by Mr. Advisor, and although that wasn't what Heel was going for, it was okay because Riel was going to live with them. Fully notices how Rihanna had used her big brain and combined the Ri from her own name with the L of Heel. And having been found out, the flustered culprit stutters while the others laugh it off. Varys soon returns from the joyful bubble to remind Heel of the terrifying issue at hand. Considering Elvan's words about the huge scars caused by fangs, there wasn't even a sliver of doubt now that the Leviathan would be soon coming for them. The next morning, Heel accompanied Mappa and the other blacksmiths to a secluded corner of the island. After receiving Mappa's consent, he casts consecutive fiery blasts onto something. They stood at a safe distance as the oppressive flames acted and slowly faded away, leaving behind an unscratched shield held by one of the defensive golems. Made out of orichalcum, the shield's defensive capabilities were further amplified with a defensive spell. As for Elvan and Varys, the two were pretty confident in the artillery-like large-scale equipment Mappa had designed to fend against bigger threats. Considering how mythical of a threat it was, they were a bit doubtful if it was actually coming for them. But if there was something capable of defeating Alamina, who was infamous as the witch because of her profound magic, and the strong warriors under her, the anonymous monster was nothing short of a Leviathan either. However, an even bigger problem rose when a contrastingly smaller Riel climbed onto a construction post and started yapping. When Elvan and the lot heard its cries, they could feel a strange sense of fear in it. And soon enough, the little one started to whimper. conveying its inability to climb back down. As the prideful warrior, Elvin took it on himself to help Riel down and started climbing the wooden post, but using his head as a handy foothold. The little one came down, as did Elvin alongside the entire construction frame. Concerned, Rihanna rushes to request the guilty yet innocent one to not cause such a mess, while Elvin requests about how Riel had even ended up there, considering Rihanna had taken him to the fields. She explains that the mischievous imp would dig up the seeds, snack on others' lunch, or leisurely stroll off to chase a few butterflies. Varys states that it wouldn't be surprising to find Riel soon walking on two legs, because kobold children simply matured that quickly. Before Heel could speak, the word field clicked in his mind, and he instinctively summoned the strange seed from his inventory. Varys was a little confused, yet curious about its big size, and although that's exactly what she said, Rihanna blurted the name Yggdrasil. Heel and Varys were stupefied hearing her quick response, but despite having spoken up, Rihanna didn't have a clue about what she just spouted. They consider it to be a merit of her farmer's crest that granted knowledge about flora. And if the term Yggdrasil was in concern, Varys did have a pretty good clue about it. Following another tale of their myths, it was renowned as a giant tree said to bless all living beings. But considering they also found a legendary item like the Change Stone as well, Varys didn't want to discard the possibility of it being just an old story. Well, considering all odds and ends, the dormant rear end of the island was soon disturbed when Heel emerged from within. This time, he has dug his way through the length of the entire Sheol Reef, which was an opportunity as well as a necessity. While they were trying to turn the first reclaimed land into a plantation area, after the recent events, it has turned into a defensive base of sorts. Heel had enough materials to reclaim this new shore as well, but because his retrieval function only worked inside the cave, he had Terran and the fluffy kids help carry the resulting dirt back inside. Having done it once, he had the little know-how this time, and had soon transformed the rugged rocks to a beautiful port. While Heel handled the plantation of Yggdrasil, Rihanna sprinkled a few flower seeds from her hometown to help enhance the beauty. As he thanked her for the considerate gesture, Mappa silently closes in on him, curiously crouched over the spot where the mythical seed had been planted. Rihanna is surprised as they turn to discover that the seed had already sprouted in this short while. At Heel's query, Rihanna denies having used the Sunstone that could have possibly boosted its growth, and Mappa frantically shook his head to state that he hasn't done anything either. Pretty clueless, Heel requests Rihanna uses the Sunstone this time, but as soon as Apollo cast his charm, the little sprout grew into a mediocre-sized plant. They could sense a strange energy as it flourished as a tree. But to Heel's utter confusion, it didn't stop there. The tiny branches rapidly grew into humongous boughs, and were soon big enough to overcast them. Its sudden growth turns disastrous as it continues maturing, and realizing how the behemoth started gaining ground on them, the quartet started running away. While Heel tightly clutched Riel, Mappa trips over one of the expanding roots, is taken over by them, and eventually disappears amongst the overgrowth of the undergrowth. As they screamed for the buried owner of the remaining hand, the explosive rubble threw them away, but it was just in the nick of time. Even on the opposite side of the island, the others were overshadowed by the giant tree that scaled even higher than the reef itself. The little seedling that Heel had held just a while ago was nowhere to be seen in the dense foliage. Having finally come to a stop, Yggdrasil stood towering over them, exercising its full glory, and living up to its name as the Tree of Legends. Concerned for their legendary blacksmith, Heel rushes toward the tree, when Rihanna spots Mappa's hand poking out in the distance. Little by little, they carefully climb their way up the tree, as if it were a mountain. As they near him, they discover that Mappa had managed to keep his head out to breathe. However, before Heel could try to get the tangled princess out, it turns out that the hand wasn't seeking help, but requesting him to just let him be. Plenty comfortable within the Tree of Blessings, Mappa nods his affirmation to stay there for a while more. Rihanna could discern the comforting smell of a lush forest, but seeping through the entire tree like veins, Heel and Rihanna could sense another great power inside. They could feel that the divine power was slowly expanding throughout the island, and without a doubt, This was the Yggdrasil, full of mysteries, that they will leave for Varese to solve. Little Riel ventures ahead in joy, and as Heel tries calling out for him to stop, Rihanna requests they discover the paradise a little more. Amidst the gentle breeze and lush green leaves, she felt as if she had returned to her hometown and wanted to cherish it for a while more. With a cheerful little woof of persuasion from Riel, Heel couldn't help but agree. They watch the tiny tots scamper away, while Rihanna follows with huge leaps thanks to her martial prowess, often helping Heel a little here and there. As they make it to the topmost section of branches, the picturesque view of the island below was breathtakingly beautiful. Dazzled by the view, they shared the blissful moment, but looking into the distant sea ahead, Heel squints his eyes, unable to spot any ships that might come bearing trouble from his kingdom. Rihanna notices this uncomfortable wave of silence come over him, and although a little hesitant, gently asks about how Mr. Heel came to be on this island, all alone. When he doesn't respond for a while, Rihanna apologizes for having asked something she wasn't supposed to. But seating himself on a stump, Heel sighs at how he hasn't spoken about his past yet. As Rihanna and little Riel take an attentive seat across him, Heel finally discloses that he had been expelled from his kingdom because he was too powerless. Considering his miraculous feats she has witnessed till now, Rihanna was baffled hearing this. But little did she know that his painful past in the royal capital did not align. It was in a forlorn section of the capital that Heel would often sneak to, which was an area that had been previously used as the servants' quarters. Heel would regularly make his way to this abandoned section and read for what little time he could spare. But the loneliness there was far more comfortable than the scornful eyes that abhorred his incompetence back inside the palace. On one such day, he heard a little rattle from within a seemingly discarded barrel. But when he peeked past it, he found a ferocious little imp with horns and tiny wings screeching at him. He was alarmed discovering a monster hiding in the capital, and as he tried moving away, the monster pounced at him. Powerless as he was, he tried shielding with his hands, but the anticipated attack never reached him. Chained to a stout post, the little monster was covered in wounds and was bleeding profusely. Setting his book aside, Heel gathered the courage to reach out to the pitiful thing and debated if he could conjure any healing magic. But unfortunately, his powerless self didn't even know how. A few days passed since he made this discovery, but every time he returned to the secluded area, he would always be eager to meet his only friend, Lopez. For him, Heel would sneak in food from the castle, and although he was no good, he tried picking the chains around Lopez's neck over and over again, but to no avail. With a friend by his side, he was eager to learn more about picking magic and try to somehow break him free. Whatever little time he spent with Lopez felt much more humane and gratifying. His consecutive failures were depressing, but the zeal to try and help Lopez fly away one day gave him the will to never quit. Although the little one was dirty and still injured, he'd caress his head, believing in his promise to set him free. All of a sudden, he heard a distant laughter in the abandoned area where no one was supposed to come to, and slowly voices could be heard, announcing that they were more than one approaching. Heel immediately moved away past a cornerstone to wait for the passerby to walk away. But the steps that approached was for Lopez, who hurriedly tried hiding behind the post. Although it was from the corner of his eyes, Heel recognized the leading figure, with golden hair, snow-white skin, and almost a feminine look. Exclaiming at the fact that the powerless Lopez was still alive, stood Orin, the 18th prince of Sanfeliz, and Heel's younger brother. A miniature tornado was whipped at Lopez, who noticed it and tried to escape, but because of the chains, he could not. The culprit, Orin, summons yet another windblade, exclaiming at how important it was to practice precision. Accompanied by several other smug children of nobility, Orin was leading a practice lesson of magic against the defenseless Lopes. As myriad spells were shot, Lopes frantically tried to hide or at least find himself a haven, but the merciless assailants kept attacking. Accompanied by the elites of the Magic Academy, Orin was ruthlessly torturing the little child, damaging it just enough to not kill it. Past the corner, Heel was trembling in fear because as powerless as he was, he could do nothing against them. However, just imagining the pain his poor friend might be going through on the other side, he decided to intervene. He rushes towards Lopes, desperately calling his name as he apologized. Despite trying his best at looking after the tiny tot for the past few days, his weak powers were nowhere enough to heal even his menial injuries. To make matters worse, if this cycle continued, and if he could neither heal him nor remove the chains, Lopes would be certainly killed. Oren and the lot were taken aback by his sudden appearance, but soon exclaimed at heel, while the injured little Lopes timidly moved behind him. Stuttering with uncertainty and fear, Heel requests to ask a favor from Oren, and clenching his fist with the useless crest, he begged him to please let the monster go. Oren eyed him with a cold look, before raising his hands toward his magical friend, who handed him a pair of white gloves. Heel could hear the tap of footsteps as Oren walked up to him, but dared not look up for he was that terrified. Oren lashes out a sharp slap with his gloved hand, and scornfully remarked at Heel's disgraceful behavior to peek, and despite being a royalty, ask him to free a monster of all things. Raising his hand again, he conjured a potent flame spell, demanding he either move or be burned to ashes with his equally powerless friend. Even if he was powerless, Heel could tell how dangerous the brewing spell was, and helplessly put his head to the ground and desperately begged Oren, who withdrew his flaring spell. With a dejected expression, Oren agreed to give up much to his surprise, even emphasizing that he had grown tired of the practices either way. Heel hurriedly turned to face Lopes with great joy, but succumbed to a shock as Oren's voice demanded him to undo the seal chaining his friend. As he looked up in confusion, Oren spoke that with his agreement, Heel could really do what he wanted to, and even set Lopes free if he wished. However, his eyes turn cold as he continues that unlike him, he couldn't have a monster running wild in the capital, and as such, he'd grant Heel 10 seconds. Before Heel could retort or request him, Oren started his countdown, and by the time realization hit, only 8 seconds remained on the clock. Heel frantically tried his luck at picking it, while the onlookers enjoyed the struggle and hopelessness. But as Lopes glanced at his desperate face, he gave him a final smile, because he could tell that his painful life had come to an end. Oren's mouth widened into a grin as the count reaches 0, and in the very next instant, Heel was looking at the burned corpse of his dear friend with a horrified look. The smoke parted, and he hoped Lopes might have somehow survived by some bleak chance, but his friend would not smile back at him again. The bastard walks away, scornfully sighing at how awful Heel was, unable to protect his only friend for crying out loud. Heel could now tell that Oren already knew how the entire thing would pan out, and lost in the torrent of rage and sadness, he tried punching him, only to be blocked by an instantaneous shield that materialized out of nowhere. The pain of losing Lopes simply wouldn't let his mind at ease. But yet again, in that same harsh tone, Oren demanded if Heel really thought he could touch him. And when he turned around, his bloody eyes revoked the terror in Heel's heart. After being brutally beaten by them, he ended up in a medical ward, but just somehow managed to walk back to that gruesome place. He collected whatever little ashes of his friend that were left, which was now in the vial that had been dangling down his neck all along. Clenching it, that pained him, mocks himself for having been so presumptuous, to even promise to free his little friend when he couldn't even help as he died before his eyes. But, unlike what he thought of himself, Rihanna was glad that he had never actually been powerless. Be it those of the Belden tribes, Riel, or even Lopes, the teary Rihanna knew that Heel has always made his best efforts at helping others. His painful backstory had really broken her, and as Heel hands her a handkerchief, he thought to himself, why did I tell her this pathetic? He pondered if it was simply because he wanted someone to listen to him, but with her assuring smile and Riel's energetic bark, he knew that he was wrong. He had simply desired to tell Rihanna about it. Together they proceed deeper into the girth of Yggdrasil, where yet another surprise awaited them. A verdant meadow spread before them, dotted with countless white flowers and a lush green bed underneath. Rihanna takes pride in how her hometown's flowers added to the beautiful landscape, while Riel galloped through the floating petals, yapping his enjoyment and wagging his fluffy tail. Considerate of how precious Lopes might be to Heel, Rihanna gently speaks that although he might not be able to erase the regret, she pleads that if he ever felt troubled by something, he must remember that he has all of them by his side. Mr. Heel was not alone anymore. He had an entire family to rely on, including the ever-cheerful Mappa, currently busy sprinting through the meadow. Rihanna gently smiled back, and having finally eased the pain in his heart a little, Heel thanked her from the bottom of his heart. After Varys's careful investigation, they discovered that Yggdrasil's sap was an exquisite sweetener, while its leaves could be harvested for making salve, or some good old-fashioned tea. However, a degree of caution was to be exercised, because consuming copious amounts of it could potentially knock someone out. Being surprisingly light and sturdy, the branches were the perfect fit for all the orichalcum tools they'd process, and obviously Mappa had soon whipped up several pickaxe handles. But that wasn't all. When Heel announced a break the next time, Fulla timidly protested that she wasn't even tired, because as it would turn out, the tree also possessed fatigue-reducing effects. The legendary tree Yggdrasil was indeed a blessing for all the residents of the Sheol Reef. As each day unfolded, the quality of their lives gradually improved. With the sleepy little Riel comfortably nestled on Shell, Heel found solace in the embrace of his dreams. However, his rest was abruptly interrupted by a shrill wail, prompting him to awaken and discover that Riel was crying in his sleep. He gently rubbed his back to try and soothe him, when the concerned others who had heard Riel whining popped up through the door to his room. Rihanna comforts the child, pampering him with her hands, when Heel jolts, noticing that Riel's left eye was glowing. As he tried getting a better look into the cause, he was astounded to find the rough shape of a crest, and Riel's eye started to glow in a blinding pallor. The sudden burst of light immediately flooded the room, and all of them flinched as their eyes were connected. They could soon see the sea raging ferociously while the broken hull of a ship groaned, and lifeless bodies of kobolds lay everywhere. A familiar crescent-shaped staff rose, and Alamina, the queen of the Tiberus kobolds, cast a massive shield spell before her. However, a scorching bolt of energy tore through the barrier, obliterating her hand alongside the staff she held in an instant. With a desperate glance at her precious baby, she hastily cast a lock spell, while the menacing figure of a serpent loomed in the fog ahead. Having exhausted her magic with the final spell, she pounced at the colossal arrays of teeth with just her claws in a futile attempt to save her child. All of them fell to the ground, shaken up by the terrifying sight they bore witness to. And without a doubt, they had shared a vision with Riel, just watching the serpent induced trauma in their hearts. And as little Riel whimpers, having witnessed it firsthand, Heel steeled himself once again, knowing that the mythical Leviathan was really coming for them now. Upon seeing Riel's crest, Varys recognized it as the emblem of clairvoyance. Although he didn't know much about the specifics of this ability, it was renowned as the all-seeing Eye of God. And if it indeed held such power, then what they had just witnessed was Riel's clairvoyant vision, from when he had parted ways with his mother. The clairvoyant vision had been shared to all other islanders as well, and evidently terrified by the Leviathan, they flocked outside their rooms. They were in disbelief that such a monster existed, and desperately pleaded with their master Heel for a solution. But the predicament was too overwhelming for him to think about any. With such a huge family to protect, he couldn't give them any false hopes, especially when they were growing frantic with each passing moment. A ferocious roar silenced them, as Elvan assumed command. Angered by the commotion caused by his tribe, he demanded to know why they were hopeless now after having overcome the impossible. And if they came together under their boss, nothing would be impossible to deal with. Having established Heel's authority and erasing the confusion, he smiles alongside Rhaena, Varys, and even little Riel. Taking a deep breath, Heel announces that even if they cannot beat the Leviathan, they are bound to clash against the legend and hence need to prepare. He pleads they lend him their strength, because they might surely have a chance. The dawning dark clouds brought rain the next morning, increasing the dampness of their situation. Despite having motivated his men, Heel foremost discards his chances at using attack magic, when even the great witch Alamina had failed. When he inquires if their orichalcum weapons might be any good, Mappa grows stressed, denoting that it was impossible as well. Varys was a little hesitant to speak initially, but broke his silence to present one slim chance at their disposal. Considering the Leviathan's colossal size, it would be impossible for it to reach the pit of their current cave. With a defensive approach brewing, the chamber where the ancient golems were found would be used as a haven for the refugees, while a second freezer is to be constructed near it for the supplies. There was the obvious threat of the serpent battering the entire island itself, instead of forcing its way in the cave as Elvan suspected. But for that, Heel had a plan in mind. Accompanied by the Terran family, Fula and Shell, he made his way to the deepest section of their mine's caverns, because he would gamble his chances at what he was best at, mining. With the island having developed significantly ever since they had first arrived here, he wanted to try and dig for new materials. One after another, they had discovered many mysterious items on the Sheol Reef, and betting on that, Heel is hopeful that they might uncover something that might become their ace against the Leviathan. Heel couldn't guarantee it either, but placing their trust in his decision, Rihanna suggests he take little Riel with him. The little one lights up hearing his name, and Rihanna reasons that although his clairvoyance wasn't controllable yet, it might come in clutch. Riel eagerly climbs into Heel's backpack, but as fully greeted the tiny tot, there was no response from within. Concerned, they flap it open, only to discover the tiny tot fast asleep, without even a sliver of the motivation he had just a while ago. Heel chuckled while the others were raring to mine, and this, the entire island united for their anti-Leviathan plan. Thanks to the dense foliage of the Yggdrasil, there was more than enough lumber to fortify their defenses, and built newer walls atop the existing ones. Riel suddenly awoke from his slumber and frantically pawed to get out of Heel's bag. Sensing his desperation, Heel is curious if some rare discovery would be unearthed, but the tiny tot just wanted to pee. Riel was surprisingly quite moody when it came to work, but his clairvoyance could easily see past the bedrock. He would often lead them to a vein of regular ores, but nothing new was found in the entire first week. But fast forward to a few weeks' time, Riel was fugitively clawing at the dirt with his little paws. And although the miners took notice, there was one major problem this time. Their optimization did not shine on that spot, which could potentially cause their section to collapse, if not the entire cave. Little Riel was undeterred, and placing his trust in his family for once, Heel decided to give it a shot. One careful shot was exactly what it took, for the ground to give in, and carry Heel alongside it, while Fulla screamed in panic. Fortunately, he landed on a smooth outcrop, not too deep to cause a painful impact, and discovered yet another cave right beneath. But as his eyes venture into the darkness ahead, he was left aghast. A humongous chainmail lay still right before his eyes, with a long sword far exceeding its own height. There lay a hole in its chest where a heartstone would be normally placed at, indicating that it was a golem. Fully was alarmed at its sight considering her previous encounter, while Heel keenly notices that although the armor was definitely made out of orichalcum, but the great sword had a silver hue to itself, announcing its greater rarity. With plans of testing out, Heel strikes it with his pickaxe, and the vibration of the durable thing reverberated throughout the cave, the staircase, past the surface above, and straight to Mappa's ears. Before Heel could even exclaim at how impossibly strong the metal was, a furiously panting Mappa stood behind him. In that short instance, while they are astounded at his sudden appearance, Mappa trembled at the sight of the sword, when his eyes flare wide open, and he hurriedly falls on his knees. He even collapses on all of his fours, as if submitting to his good lord. While they stood watching in utter confusion, Mappa bowed again and again, as if worshipping the great sword, before scampering out of the rubble in the blink of an eye, with it hauled over his head. They could tell that Mappa was as if desperate to process the sword, and follow him to the workshop shortly after. The forge was blazing with coals being refilled for the embers, and several mechanisms at work. while Mappa was dancing frantically to signal to the blacksmiths, who deduced that he was complaining about the lack of enough heating power to melt the sword. Rihanna nonchalantly walks up to them, curious about the sudden chaos, and at her sight, Heel found an answer to Mappa's predicament. Terran's webs created 2 hammocks across the ceiling, and in the center of the room lay the crucible of concern. Alongside Rihanna, Heel's plan was to increase the heating power of the furnace with their magic, and as the appropriate temperature was reached, the others slowly lower the sword in the vortex of flames. Mappa carefully watched as the melted metal flowed out of the furnace through a duct and started working with a portion of it, while the remainder was turned into ingots. When Heel collected a small portion, Mr. Advisor announced it to be mithril, the hardest metal in existence that was capable of killing gods, who were probably paying the price for losing it in the first place. Heel is taken aback by this discovery, because they might finally have a chance this time, and the entire credit belonged to little Riel. Hopefully, Mappa could now create their strongest card, and with a few more weeks of effort, the defensive wall was also completed, giving their island a more fort-like appearance. Nothing they did could be qualified as enough for a war against a legendary beast, but the Sheol Reef was preparing for its first great battle. One night when Heel was returning to his quarters, he could hear some noise coming from his room, and as he comes closer, he discovers Elvin speaking to Riel. Before he could proceed to ask them about it, Rihanna silently walks up behind him, requesting he doesn't with a smile. Little Riel looks up as the general calls for him and sincerely apologizes for having spoken ill about his mother previously. As a prideful warrior, he couldn't help but acknowledge that his mother was a great warrior, and gently rubbing his head, promises to prove it to him by avenging his mother in due time. Heel and Rihanna felt relieved as this great problem was resolved, and acknowledging Elvin's promises, little Riel warmly pawed at his eye of all things. Elvin frantically held his eye while screaming in pain, and although things ended up a little awkwardly, a great weight had been lifted off their hearts. As the next day dawned, a watchguard furiously sounded the alarm, and recognizing it, Heel rushes from inside his room. As he made it to the defensive shore, Elvin was already standing in wait, but he didn't respond to the alarming cause, which were a couple of ships coming their way. Varys hands Heel a telescope devised by Mappa, and as soon as he uses it, a familiar yet ominous emblem was in his sight. The ships belonged to the survivors of the Orc tribe that had massacred the Beldon tribe, and hence, Elvin wasn't going to let them even set foot on their island. As they kept watching, the bobbing ships hurled multiple volleys of shots at something submerged underwater out of their sight, while they debated if they were attacking something. Heel is startled as Riel starts barking wildly, and as his clairvoyance crest activated, a massive pressure came over the residents of the island. Heel was alarmed, sensing like a terrifying lot of magic energy erupting as the waves welled, and all of them were in disbelief as the waves erupted. One of the Orc ships was ripped apart as a giant serpent with sinister dark scales emerged from below with a fear-inducing roar. And almost reaching the heavens above, the godlike Leviathan drove the seas mad. Cannons blazed as the Orcs found the window to attack, but the shells just bounced off the serpent without dealing any damages, and the Leviathan rose to its full glory, daring them to try him now. Watching this brewing storm from afar, the panicking islanders could confirm that the Orcs were being chased by the Leviathan all along. But when Elvin struck the alarm bell by throwing his axe with a disastrous force, they snap back as he demands them to get moving and prepare to attack. Understanding his well-reasoned prejudice against the Orcs, Heel tried speaking to him, but in a stern voice, Elvin replied that he wasn't attacking to save the Orcs, but was simply using them as a bait for the serpent. Willing to comply, Heel requests Fuli to immediately inform the refugees to evacuate to the planned chamber. But, before running off with little Riel, she timidly pleads them all to make it through. Varys, Elvin, Heel, Mappa, and Rihanna, each with a confident smile, promises to. And at the shaman's command, the goblins rushed to prepare the heavyweight ballista they had created. As a goblin churned a pulley underground, the tiles of the defensive fortress above slid apart, and chains started to move alongside multiple cogwheels. Under Mappa's supervision, a humongous expo arose from within. Graced with the mithril arrow Mappa had forged with his awl, it was their greatest card against the Leviathan. With careful calculations and precise work, the goblins aimed it at the target and waited for the exact moment when it would rush at the orc ship. As it did, Elvan screamed his command to fire, and pulling at a massive lever, the bolt was unleashed at a threatening pace. As it approached, the Leviathan took notice from its peripheral vision, and to their utter dismay, looped out of its trajectory, hence evading their only weapon against it. Heel was horrified at how nimble the giant was, but unfazed, Elvan screamed that they could still make it. Considering how it dodged the bolt, it had confirmed that a proper hit will indeed take it down. But as they prepared the next one, the beast switched directions and started swimming towards them. Alongside the golems, Heel decided to hold it down while the ballista was readied, and pleads Rihanna to prepare a certain magic they had devised. While golems 10 and 11 cast an ice spell, 12 and 13 synchronized their wind magic. That was finally amplified by Heel to launch a formidable mega blizzard. The Leviathan rammed into it head-on, but it didn't deter. It kept forging onwards even if they started pouring more mana into the spell. But that wasn't their plan, to be precise. The beast shudders to a stop, only to discover that the increase in the ice attribute had frozen the seawater in the blink of an eye, thanks to the wind magic that acted as a catalyst. Heel's plan to find an upper hand was by completely negating the Leviathan's movement. However, the legendary beast abruptly stopped resisting and started convulsing while Heel noticed a sudden spike in its magic power. The area underneath its scale started to glow, and so did the serpent's closed maw. As the jaws parted, an ominous lot of mana could be seen welling within. And sensing the threat it posed, Heel frantically pleads the defensive twins to uphold their shields at an angle that would divert the obvious. Even Goku bid farewell as a blasphemous beam of heat and light evaporated the waves on its way to the shield reef, and as it struck, a blinding light overtook the impact. A proportionate dome-like shield was formulated to fend and simultaneously divert the beam. But the attack was so powerful that it constantly strained the ones at its source. Just the force following it was potent enough to disrupt the others from moving, and Rihanna screamed in panic as the orichalcum shields held by the golems started to disintegrate, because Heel was right behind them. As the terrifying serpent's breath died down, the island was overwhelmed by a standstill silence, but humongous explosions violently shook the surface as the diverted blows landed elsewhere far behind them. The golems had taken considerable damages from the exchange, while the orichalcum shields were but barely recognizable. Having exhausted the ones hindering its movements, the Leviathan resumed swimming onwards without any resistance. Rihanna urgently announces to Elvan that the ballista was fortunately ready, but noticing how the serpent was closing in, Heel debated if it could attack them at this close range, even without its ferocious breath that required it to be distant. "Fire!" commanded Elvan, and the bolt took off, but even the Leviathan was baffled, because there was nothing approaching it. The islanders were strangely adamant and curious about the outcome, and soon enough, something mysterious successfully impaled the Titan's thorax. Rihanna had cast a hiding spell to ensure that the stealthy arrow made a definite hit this time, and as the goblins cheer at the accomplishment, the Leviathan lets out a groan of agony. It collapses as a rope was seen surfacing from underneath of the waves and tugging at it, because the implanted bolt also carried a rope extending from the island. Having been coiled using Terran's steel-like webs, it would ensure their grasp as they worked a huge gear to tighten it. And to observe even greater caution, Heel commands golems 1 to 5, whose hands detach and extend with chains underneath. One by one, they latch onto various positions around the Leviathan, and in the blink of a golem eye, 10 orichalcum chains had bound the beast and rendered it immobile. The chains bear great tension as the entrapped beast retaliated, but as the golems respond, the sheer force was too overwhelming for the source gears to bear. Heel pleads Elvan to hurry before it breaks free, and having prepared the next bolt of mithril, the general aimed for the head. But before he could fire it, several projectiles retaliated from within the scales of the kraken, and as Heel watches in disbelief, they pelted the golems restraining it. Those projectiles turned out to be ominous little pests, like cockroaches. Varys and Rhianna recognized the sea stalkers at first sight and revealed that the parasitic monsters must have been hiding underneath the Leviathan's scales. With strong mandibles and claws, the tiny pests started wrecking the golem's limbs, and alarmed at the scene, goblin archers sprang to snipe them out. To make matters worse, many of them were climbing the walls to attack the occupied archers, and gnawing at the chains using its teeth and monstrous strength. The Leviathan hurled the golems against the fort walls. Heel could only watch in terror as the beast broke free and the spikes on its back started to glow. Unlike the smoldering heat it emanated when it had shown previously, the brightness only grew at a threatening pace. Alarmed, Heel pleads the others to get behind the shield he'd summon, and the horns fired countless bolts of energy that streaked through the dark clouds. The descending beams indifferently battered the fending shield, while Heel and Rhianna kept flooding it with copious amounts of mana. The wide area damage-dealing attack wrecked most of the fort, while they focused on protecting the people. And as the attack concluded, they debated if it was all over amidst the subsiding dirt. However, it was too soon to speak, because a huge serpentine tail came crashing at them. And before Heel even had the chance to summon another shield, the blasphemous downward draft annihilated the entire fort. The impact sent tremors throughout the island and chills down the spine of the refugees. But petrified by the chaos, the little children started to cry. A little girl nervously asked her mother if they would lose their home again, but she had faith in their heroes fighting outside for their sake. The disastrous blow had thrown their master Heel away. But before he could crash against the hard rocks, Shell arrived in the nick of time to negate the impact. Heel thanked his friend as his breathing became heavier, and noticing a destroyed golem core before him, understood that 6 and 7 who jumped in to protect him had been destroyed after taking the direct hit. When he tried confirming the other's wellness, only terror awaited him, because the entire ballista had been broken apart and buried into the rubble, with no signs of the proud general, the magicless shaman, legendary blacksmith, friendly spider mama, or the beautiful Rhianna. Heel and Shell witnessed the advent of the sea stalkers raring to attack them, while the Leviathan loomed behind them, as if carefully monitoring his pawns. Even if the huge Leviathan could not make it into the cave, the sea stalkers could, if he isn't able to fend them off. He electrocuted them, using his potent lightning magic. But after struggling for a while, they immediately sprang back up. The continuous shield spells had exhausted his magic reserves, and even if he tried flaring another one, the small thing was weak enough for him to be thrown away. Realizing this, the sea stalkers pounced at him, and Heel desperately pleaded Shell to escape while he'd buy him time. In a flash, someone crashed before them and furiously swung a shovel to exterminate the approaching sea stalkers. Amidst the chaotic bloodshed, Heel recognized the familiar hand wielding the shovel, because it was the martial master Rhianna that had come to his rescue, really pissed at their insolence to try and lay their hands on Mr. Heel. Heel was overjoyed to find her alive, but before they could continue their joyous reunion, yet another volley of arrows traced the sky, this time from their rear end. They pierced the sea stalkers that were trying to sneakily climb the wall, and looking far into the distance, Heel spotted a group of people emerging from within the rubble. All of his fellow warriors had taken refuge under the golems, who had survived the explosive skirmish. And albeit laden with injuries, their will to fight back was unwavering. Following their princess's lead, they maul the sea stalkers making their way to the cave, while the goblin spearmen damaged the parasites, and the surviving golems finished them off with their powerful magic. Although it was a momentary relief, the joy of reuniting was profound, but the sky started to glow again as they turned around, for the Leviathan blew yet another torrent of heat. The golems that succeeded at intercepting it were instantly disintegrated upon impact. One after another, their defenses were wearing out. However, the legendary beast was far from exhausted. Varys was bewildered at how easily the lightning-attributed orichalcum golems were defeated even if they weren't defense-oriented. But decisive to take it upon himself, Heel announces that it was time they used their final straw. Against Rhianna's protests, they simply had to take the dangerous chance, now that the Leviathan was this close. Although willing to comply with his command, she politely clasps his hand, but the flustered heel was surprised, as their little touch generated a golden shine. Rihanna had transferred him the little magic power she possessed, and pleaded that even if it would be of minimal help, Heel must beat the beast for sure. With an energetic agreement, Heel noticed the Titan brewing another catastrophe. A blazing arrow was fired at its tusks, and slowly but surely, the serpent took notice. The whipping arrows crashed into its tusks, causing it pain immense enough to retract its beam, and noticed the one responsible begging to die. Its body radiated danger as the horns on its back complied, and streaks of energy lay waste to the island, while Heel desperately weaved through them, riding on Terran. The sea stalkers were either crushed or thrown away, as the Leviathan finally climbed onto the island and chased after Heel. While Rihanna and Varys could do nothing but watch this from afar, Elvan begged to disagree. He rushes away from them and starts tugging at the rope of the ballista that was responsible for propelling the mithril arrow. Varys pleaded him to give up because with the winch destroyed, they could neither do anything to use as a lever to pull the tightened rope, nor was it possible to pull it with one's brute strengths. However, the great general was far from swayed. He wasn't willing to let their master risk his life while he stood by, doing nothing, and the veins on his arms and face convulsed as he tugged at the rope with all the strength his body could muster. However, Elvin's grip started to falter, and in that exact moment, Mappa rushed to his side, his muscles bulging as he struggled alongside him. Terran barely halted in time as the monster jumped over their heads to smash them. But before it could, several explosives slammed into its head. Throwing his gaze towards their originating direction, Heel discovers the orcs rowing closer, but so does the Leviathan. However, its tilted head failed to trace the next mithril arrow that impaled its left eye. Elvin had acted as a manual lever to position it perfectly, while Mappa had used his hammer to beat the rope in place. With the target occupied, Heel commands Terran to fly, and she does. Mama Spider spews a web at the Leviathan's head and tugs hard enough to haul herself over the blinded beast. Having succeeded at the most significant part of the plan, holding a rather special bag, Heel raises his hand to signal to a specific someone watching it all from a safe distance, with clairvoyance at his disposal. Riel yaps to convey this signal to the armed fillet, who alongside the tiny spiders swung their pickaxes at various points underground. Carefully planned chains of cracks appeared across the pillars upholding the ceiling, and in a similar chain of events, the entire thing collapsed. The mighty creature came down as the ground below gave in, and because of its huge size, the fall damage was simply multiplied. It groaned as the rubble followed suit, battering its entire length. The master engineer of the plan stood atop the scene, watching in great joy as his plan to draw the beast inland panned out. Having dug a cavern below the reclaimed land, they had left just a few pillars supporting the ground above. Well aware that it wasn't a fatal blow either, Heel unveiled a silver-hued pickaxe from within the bag he had been hauling all along. It was the very pinnacle of Mappa's works, the godly mithril pickaxe. Heel descended alongside the rubble, as Mr. Advisor denoted the acquired mining tool, and as he found the precise window to hit, it inquired again, "Do you want to mine?" The Leviathan retorted by spewing a disastrous bout of energy, but summoning a magic shield with the entire magic gifted by Rihanna, he deflected it on his way down. Finally underground, the Cave King exercised the full glory of his powers, and Mr. Advisor duly followed to optimize them. Heel hurled it without a moment to spare or hesitate, and recognizing the optimized weaknesses alongside pinpointing the conjured powers, Mr. Advisor turned the Cave King into a god killer. The ones above witnessed an explosion welling from within, and in the very next moment, the impenetrable exoskeleton was torn apart. The godly Leviathan broke as the ungodly power shattered his cranium. Heel kept forging ahead as his powers continued gushing out and wrecking the entire length of the beast. And realization dawns that his strike had been optimized to find a flaw in its defenses. The onlookers broke into cheers while the legendary beast broke apart and started to collapse without a struggle. Clinging onto a rope spewed by Terran, the successful Heel smiled in kind. But a shriek from below sent chills down his spine as he turned around. Despite bearing countless fatal wounds, the beast wasn't willing to forfeit just yet, and summoned a final roar of terror. The sheer power this final roar possessed sent tremors throughout the island, while the blood-curdling noise inflicted excruciating pain at the brains of those above. This wasn't something Heel's shield could fend against, and as the one to bear its full frontal damage that was further amplified because of the cave's echoes, blood started to flow out of his eyes and nose. Heel lost consciousness and lay suspended by the thread, and as the tremors caused the cave to break in, Elvan and Varys pleaded Terran to hurriedly pull him up. Varys is startled as someone else leaps over him, and the Beldon tribe's princess joined anything but the death count. At her request, Terran furnished another one of her webs, and clinging onto it tightly with her right hand, she made her way towards Mr. Heel. She frantically pleaded him to snap back, and he groaned as she assured him that they would make it through. Heel could barely shake his head in denial, as he pleaded that she wouldn't make it if his dead weight pinned them down. However, Rhianna wasn't willing to leave him alone. Positive that they will make it out together, she tightly held onto him while tugging at the rope. But unfortunately, the debris above begged to disagree.